For the first method of blending I'm going to show you, you will need two brushes, one dedicated to one color, one dedicated to the other. So I'm trying to blend hair into sky, so you can see I have one brush that's for warm and dark hues, and then I have another brush that's dedicated to the blue cool hues. Notice how those brush hairs are taken really good care of. You want to make sure that your brushes aren't opening up or splaying out. So you want to always wash them gently and use cold water, soap to clean them. Always rinse them out. Don't leave soap in the brush. This first technique to get a soft edge is called wet into wet. So in order to do this, you need two brushes, those two brushes that I showed you, one for the hair and then another brush for the sky area, for the background. So both bodies of paint have to be simultaneously wet. In order to do this, you need to paint pretty quickly and you need to have both brushes readily available. I actually paint with both brushes in one hand and then I just alternate. So there I just switched to the background brush, which is that kind of teal color, and I'm pushing the teal color into the brown. I'm going to show you a close-up of that in just a minute. So the goal is to get that edge to, instead of being a hard, sharp, in focus edge, that edge really needs to blur to become a soft edge. Soft edges are predominantly what we see, so anything outside of the focal area, which in this case is the face, should be soft. Now there should still be some soft edges on a face too. We're going to talk about that at a later date because I'm going to teach you the proportions of the face and how to do a portrait. Okay, so this is a close-up of what I'm doing, and by the way, this is not my painting I'm working on. This is an old painting that I found in storage that a student made, and I'm just working on softening and blurring some of those edges, because that's how our eye looks at the world. We can't focus on everything at once. Anything that is drifting off into the distance should have a blurred or soft edge. We also talked about lost and found edges. I can bring that up in a minute too, but it is almost always better to have too many soft edges than too many hard edges. It's always easier to go back in and make an edge hard. Hard edge means crisp, so where one value meets another. The second technique for how to soften an edge is called dry brush, and it's pretty simple to do. In fact, you may already be doing it and not realize that's the technique you're using, but it's where you take a brush loaded with paint and you work on top of a dry surface and you're pushing that paint on top of that dry surface and you're creating what's called a scumble. So you're kind of pushing the paint on top of another layer and you're seeing through to the layer below. It's a semi-opaque layer, which means you can't really see through it, and you're just roughing up that edge so that it blurs. So there are actually three ways to create a soft edge. This is way number two. The third technique is with gradients, with getting a quick gradient from one value to another value to another. But as you can imagine, that requires at least two brushes, maybe more to do, and you have to work quickly because the acrylic dries so fast. I've been working on a figure so far, which means a person, but there is a little bit of landscape here and it pertains to what we're doing. In fact, everything that I'm teaching you applies to any subject. So whether that's a vase with flowers or a landscape or a portrait of your dog, whatever, you do need to have soft edges in that painting. So here we're looking at a hilltop that's supposed to be Stonehenge in the background, but that landscape where that land is meeting the sky, the horizon line, it's awfully sharp. So I'm going in there and I'm going to soften that. I'm using wet into wet, which is my kind of go-to technique. And I think that's because I'm an oil painter. You can use any of the other techniques too, so the dry brush or a quick gradient. But you can see I'm pushing that dark value into the light value. And again, two separate brushes, one for the sky, one for the land. And I'm trying to fuss with that edge. By the way, when I'm doing this, I tend to use shorter strokes and I'll go different directions. You can see I'll go side to side. I'll use the skinny side of the brush, but then I'll also use the wide side of the brush too. So I'll kind of alternate. Make sure you guys, as you're working and as you're painting, it's very important that you put your fingertips in the middle of that brush. So on the green handle or on that black stripe, not near the ferrule. I think the teal part of the handle is the best part to hold it. and you just want to kind of fuss with it until that edge becomes a softer out of focus edge. Ideally, I would go in and work on the Stonehenge itself, so those boulders, I would soften those as well so they look like they're farther off in the distance. And the farther something is from the viewer, the blurrier it can be or should be. Painting that we're looking at is kind of a painting with some proportional flaws. So those would need to be fixed before you call the painting finished. However, I'm using it because there's a lot going on. It's got the landscape, it's got the birds in the background. I'm trying to soften the edge on the hair, but ideally you'd go in and you'd soften the cheekbone and someone would work on that nose so it's not such a red nose. It looks like they have allergies really bad. But even the eyebrow is a little bit too sharp on that edge. You'd want to soften that out as well. Anytime you have a form shadow is a, by definition, a soft transition. So you'd have to create a soft gradient, which is what we're working on right now, basically. Again, I've got my two brushes, one dedicated to the hair, one dedicated to that background color, and I'm pushing back and forth. Whenever you do hair, you have to go in the direction of the hair. That's part of wrapping your line around the form, or wrapping your stroke around the form, is to try and suggest that form. Here we're looking at one of the birds. I think they're supposed to be crows. There were 3 of them. And that's got an awfully hard edge. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to try and soften that edge. Remember, a blurred edge can kind of convey movement and make the object appear more alive. So that is one of the key differences between an amateur work and a master work. Is master artists know to blur their edge. They're thinking about their edge and how they can manipulate that. It is tricky to do, but if you practice now, you're going to get good, especially if you continue on to another art class. It'll be a skill that you can utilize later. So just think about that and think about how the world around us operates, that things really do become blurred if they're moving or if they're farther off in the distance.